This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with this is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Merry meet.
What are we talking about tonight, Puka?
We're going back in time to talk about Dark Ages Fae, the one and only historical setting that is kind of for Changeling.
Yeah, kind of.
Arguably, tangentially,
We
I
will
don't know.
discuss that.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. Some people think it is, and some of those people even helped write the book. So,
True.
this was published in 2004.
Yes.
So, keep forgetting Dark Ages existed that long. Printed in Canada.
Hey. Technically, I think this was the last book of the Old World of Darkness because it came out after Time of Judgment. It might have been, maybe there was another Dark Ages book or two somewhere in the mix, but yeah. The Old World had ended by this point.
Had a bunch of authors, bunch of playtest groups, which I'm still a little bit... I want to see those playtest notes. I'm a little bit confused by some things in here.
I believe at least a couple of them might be listening to the podcast. So
I'll just say up ahead, I ran a game with this before. I had some mechanical quibbles, like issues. Let's say mechanical issues, not just quibbles, running it. And then there's the whole connection to Changeling question, are the two issues I have with the book. But there's lots of other stuff I like about it, so we'll get into it.
Yeah. We can also mention this is, I believe, the only revised Changeling book in the sense that it uses revised era mechanics to some extent.
Yeah. I mean, C20 is pretty close to revised, but yeah.
Yeah.
And it's Dark Ages, which is not exactly the same as Modern Knights revised, but...
Yes. So, shall we dive in?
Yeah. Each chapter has, like, some art and a little one-page story. Oh, this one's more than one-page story, the beginning, but...
I'm pretty okay with the art. I mean, it's, you know...
I think it fits the game quite well. So
yeah, it has a vibe.
Doesn't just look like weird anime elves all the time or whatever.
Yeah, I also really like the sort of motif for the page borders and the icons and sidebars where it's like a cross between, I guess, iron, but then also like candle smoke.
Yep. And the little fiction pieces are written in a slightly stylistic font, but I can read them still, so that's good.
Anyway, the prelude, The Loss of Hayden's Creek, wherein we meet Garain the Tearbringer, presumably a firstborn, and Thulis, a willow tree anemone, and Elsabet, who's a Slua-like thing who likes cream.
I thought she was a Puka-like thing who liked cream, but anyway.
Maybe. Those distinctions aren't quite so ironclad at this point in the history. So, anyway, they're on their way to a farmhouse. The mysterious bundle, which turns out to be the child of Betheth, Garain's enemy, whom they are apparently leaving among mortals, and then it will grow up to be a changeling for reasons.
And then they're going to raise whatever the human baby that they switch with it.
I like how when they talk about mortals, it's like, ew.
Yeah, they're stinky.
They've got all that fluids and all that stuff. So they're doing this little switcheroony, but then the churchmen come. Oh no.
Well, they do the switcheroony. They come back. It's Watch raising over the...
Yeah. And then the enemy's daughter that they left behind has been baptized and gone Christian. And the Fae are like, oh no, our powers won't work.
Yep.
So it's a nice little overview, I thought, in terms of showing without telling too much. You get like the bits of magic and wondrous powers. At one point they like stroke a door to unlock it or something. It's like, oh, it's a nice little bit of magic. You get some of the social dynamics between them with their different courts and their different origins. There's references to the mists and dominions and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's a good intro in both. It does introduce a lot of things, but doesn't require you to have already read the section of the things it's introducing to understand the story. So,
nor does it require you to know anything about Changeling, it must be pointed out, because technically this was a Dark Ages vampire book.
Well, they're all Dark Ages vampire book, including Mage.
Yeah.
It's a Dark Ages. It doesn't say Dark Ages vampire on the cover. Vampire was the core book for Dark Ages.
Yes,
but
in more ways than one.
Yeah, this whole book uses a lot of things from Changeling. It never actually mentions Changeling the Dreaming at all.
Nope.
In the entire book. So
just uses similar terms for different things.
Mm-hmm.
So then chapter introduction, chapter I.
Mm-hmm. And it's about Michael the Archangel, sort of.
Knowing vampire lore, it is so confusing to see a non-Toreador Methuselah named Michael in Constantinople. So, just putting that out there. But at least the story gives this kind of vague introductory sense of how oaths are going to work, which I
Mm-hmm.
was appreciative of.
But also hints at like the Fae are shifted by human belief too. Like he's having trouble remembering things that aren't from the worship and prayer and stuff.
Indeed.
And then we get to the introduction.
Yes. So, the truth, with capital letters and heavy quotes, I guess, according to the Fae, is that they created the world and all life in it. A grandiose claim, but they stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
They square that fact with the current situation of humans running everything via a few key concepts that we get spelled out here as kind of core things to know before diving into the game.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost of which is probably the one that is maybe hardest to see the connection to Changeling in terms of using the same term, which is the mists.
Yeah.
Josh, what are the mists?
They're kind of like glamour, but also kind of like the mists. They are the slippery, chaotic, but hidden side of the Fae, kind of, or the power that they use. Sort of what makes them Fae, I would say.
And makes everything else in theory.
Yeah. But everything else doesn't have a lot of mists in it anymore, but the Fae have
Mm.
more mists in it. And like, if you get enough mists and you just dump it somewhere, either by itself or somewhere else, you get Fae. So
Yeah. They're inaccessible in their purest, most magical form, but the Fae can channel them in different ways.
mhm.
And one of those ways is through weaving, which is the ordered application of that chaotic power, like with cantrips.
It's like nice banality.
Yeah, a necessary evil kind of
Mhm.
thing. But I liked how they sort of frame it as, oh, but humans are also learning to weave. So rather than the opposition that we tend to get in Changeling of the Fae do things with glamour and the humans have, through history, more and more done things with banality, it's more
Mhm.
like this tug of war using the same techniques. And I
Yeah.
kind of liked that.
But you can also kind of map it if you're thinking of it like Changeling. You can sort of still map weaving to banality and mist to glamour, and there's even the same sort of talk about cantrips being that way. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, in a sense, humans smithing is a human version of a cantrip.
Yeah. Well, what I like too is it's not like the werewolf weaver is. Oh, maybe it's like it. Creativity is still weaving, kind of.
Mhm. Regardless, one must beware of imbalance between the two, lest one become lost, which is kind of like bedlam, or locked, which is kind of like being undone.
Mm-hmm.
We get notes about the more fluid experience of time for the Fae and their less limited conception of space.
I think it's a good way to have like one PC is 15 years old, the other one's 15,000 years old. It doesn't matter. It's fine.
Right.
We're all starting
Why is
characters.
the 15-year-old in charge?
Yeah.
I liked the dig at vampires being born human and therefore unable to handle immortality. Like,
Yep.
take that, vampires. So then at some point, the Fae went to war and left the world in humanity's care, along with the power to define the world as they saw fit, as it says on page 18. And they maintained this arrangement through the use of oaths, although humans are forgetting them.
Oaths are one of the things I think is most like in Changeling, but it's not entirely the same still. But
They're more defined, in a sense.
yeah. And this when they talk about oaths, there's like a broad category of oaths, but then the real important oaths are the ones they do with mortals, which have like a reciprocal and have extra knock-on effects. Oaths with other fae or vampires or whatever, you can do those too, and that feels a bit more like changing the dreaming oaths. But
And a Fae who holds an oath, in turn, gets a place in the human world. They are linked to the human world in a tangible way, which helps protect them against echoes. They're
yeah,
sort of traditional banes based on how aberrant they are to reality, I guess.
they can also help them get missed. No, I'm not sure, get weaving too. But
Yeah.
we'll get into that later.
Yeah, because you can get weaving points.
Yeah. Yeah. So echoes are like curses that the Fae might have. Like we get into that. We'll get into that later in the chapter. But like things that
I'd say it's like the flaw, yeah.
yeah, and it's stuff humans do that mess with them, like
Right on.
warding, putting up horseshoes bad, or ringing bells. But each Fae has different echoes, and you can gain them over time and stuff. So.
What's the thing about brewing beer in a walnut or something? That's supposed to be a...
But they're also kind of like in mage terms, like almost like permanent paradox flaws. It's kind of neat.
Let's not muddy the waters by bringing mage in.
Okay. I just meant
So
in terms
then
of how
we
they appear. I'm not trying to bring in the metaphysics. But
okay. So then we get theme and mood, and we're told that many of the ones that work for Dark Ages Vampire will work for Dark Ages Fae, perhaps. But in addition, we get the themes of wonder, as in the Fae's wonder at the world, reclamation after the millennia of war that they've been fighting, and fate as they prepare to return to that war and are concerned about the outcome. The mood overall is anxiety, as the oath truce that has kept them at peace for the last century is nearing its end.
So are these proper themes and moods? I know you bring that up a lot in books.
I'd say they actually are. With the exception of maybe wonder, I don't know that I really want to use any of the others because, like, I don't know, having the setting be at the brink of war isn't really that interesting to me. And
Mm,
a lot of the book kind of gravitates around it in a way that I find like, yeah, it's fine, but I kind of wished there were more
yeah.
options.
Oh, we'll get into the options later because that's
Yes. They give us a chapter by chapter breakdown and some sources. I did really like there's a sidebar for advice playing these creatures that are more ancient than all of humanity.
mhm.
So things like avoiding humanoid forms, avoiding their behaviors, ignore the things that they're susceptible to, like that pesky gravity. But at the same time, because of that theme of wonder, the Fae are drawn to and intrigued by humans. So that
Yeah,
kind of tension I thought was a nice thing to talk about.
yeah. I like that. It's another reason to actually be interested in humans because I know this game could have gone to be like, why would you even go to human world? Like,
Yeah. F this, I'm out is,
hmm
the impulse to fight
but we'll
against.
get into the other worlds. There isn't as much other worlds as
There isn't much
C20.
world, to be frank.
Yeah,
And I'll have comments on that later. But we end the intro with some lexicon. Any noteworthy things here we should call out?
I mean, Changeling's an important one for our listeners,
Yeah.
but we'll get into that later in detail. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's all just game terms. It's not like the vulgar argot where you're like, what? No one uses that word.
Which Middle Irish literary term did they crib this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, these are all just like, I mean, they might have been taken from that kind of thing, but they're all just, this is the word that's used. All these terms get used a lot in the book when they're explaining the concept behind them. So
Yeah. It's just that there are a few which are the same as in Changeling the Dreaming, but have a different meaning here. So, like, for example, seining, it doesn't mean just kind of receiving your true name as a changeling. It's actually the 3-step process of
Mhm.
joining one of the 4 courts, things like that.
Although it does involve getting your true name as a fae. So,
Right, but not just that.
yeah.
There's a whole process to it. It's kind of like the seining and the toggle and the fior and all the other stuff rolled into one.
hmm The whole fostering process,
Yes.
yeah. Which they do still call fostering as well. So,
Yes, and you learn a court language,
hmm
the fostering tongue. Chapter 1.
yeah. So we have a story about a winter court fae who's breaking into a lost one holding, I should say.
Palace?
Palace, yeah. Sealed
Ice
off thing.
thing. Her name is Muriel, which was my great aunt's name. So I'm like, oh, great aunt Muriel, what have you done? But
She's got a history you don't know about, yeah.
may she rest in peace. So yeah, the world of the Fae.
Mm-hmm.
I do like these intro stories. It's they
Me
give
too.
flavor. So we get some notes on the nature of the Fae. Got the 3 origins, where you have the Firstborn, who are pure magic, and Anime, who are nature Fae, and Changelings as human hybrids. And they can
Mm-hmm.
go either way, like we said. So,
Well, actually, just like a bunch of different ways changelings can go. It's kind of neat.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
there's the fostering route. There's the child of firstborn in humans. I'm not sure if an anime can do that. Or the, hey, you were a human servant of the Fae. You lived there long enough. You became a changeling. So,
I think in anime just make more in anime.
yeah, I don't know if they mentioned
I
it in an
believe it's in
anime.
there somewhere. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I know that they arise in moments of elemental turmoil, which I always thought was cool.
Yeah,
Like,
most in
ooh,
anime, yeah, they even have like a flaw where you reproduced, or you were another flaw where you were born. So that was
your mom was an earthquake. Things
yeah.
like that.
Your mom existed. That's the insult.
Yeah.
You had a mother and father. Ew.
And then we have 4 courts as opposed to the usual 2.
Yeah, they try really hard to make this work, and I think it's one of the challenges of running a game. I think is the court dynamics, but we'll get into.
I am going to repeatedly defer to you on that because, as I am ashamed to admit, I
Yeah.
still have not played Dark Ages.
Well, I think what we all did. I can't remember what court they. I think everyone was spring court in that game. Maybe I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
Would you say it's easier to have everybody be all the same court or all different courts?
All the same court, for sure. More so than Changeling. Like, it's a much easier to mix Seelie and Unseelie and Changeling than mixing the 5 courts, in a sense, here. Because there's also the Solstice Fae, who are just the non-court courts. Or the Caitiff, if you will.
But briefly about the proper seasons, we have spring, which embraces change in all forms, summer, which adheres to tradition and structure, autumn, who are clever and fascinated by humanity, and winter, the grim and brutal nightmares types. There's a note on the side about the sign and talking about the oath truce. So there's little prophetic glimmers of what will mark the end of the truce. So the quiet sky and the darkening sky, the black sun, things like that, which we may talk about later.
Yeah, the truce will end in 1230. Just apropos, the bubonic plague hit Europe around 1346 when it started.
Yeah.
So
we're on the earlier side of the shattering here.
Yeah. But it definitely, there's even some Changeling stuff talking about a war sort of leading up to it.
Yeah.
So.
War of the Seasons. Which we do find out more about, but a lot later in this chapter. So
yeah,
we get bits about the seining process. Usually, the court in which a Fae is raised as a fosterling is the one into which they are seined as a full member, but not always. The process is they spend 9 months going through the cleansing, and those correspond to the 3 seasons of the courts they are not joining. They are pardoned from their previous responsibilities and crimes. Then the heart of the process is the naming, where the Right Master bestows a courtly name.
I like that pardoning, though. You have to admit all your crimes publicly first to be pardoned for them.
Yeah. And then after the naming is the acceptance, which is apprenticeship for the court's season, whether that's study, obedience, cheap labor, whatever. I like how each court approaches the steps differently and the little bits of ritual, like don't talk to the Right Master during your acceptance and things like that. So if we had gotten more books for this, court books would have been nice.
Yep.
Hint for the storyteller's vault.
But then we also get agendas. So these are like political impulses in Changeling. Where it's just, I'm cool with that. They're not like political groups. They're just sort of impulses. The impulses are like militants. They're all like, ooh, yay, war. Humanists who are like studying humanity.
But not necessarily tolerating them.
The truce bearers who want to end the war. And then the Constantinians who want to really study Christianity. A lot like some of the descriptions of House Liam. Like, there's not a lot of, properly religiously believing Fae. It's more like they want to really understand Christianity to figure out why it's doing all these things to hurt the Fae and what power's behind it and all that.
Yeah, and then we get the Patron Council, what was your take on these fellows?
I think on top of everything else, it's getting a bit much. Like, we already have the 4 courts and all this other stuff, and then they bring in the Patron Council, and I'm not really sure how it fits in with everything.
I'll tell you my theory. So we're told that the Patron Council is kind of slowly growing in power. It's this loose alliance of traditionalists. Their 3 factions are the Seekers, who are scholarly lore keepers advocating egalitarianism and shared rulership, the Vanguard, who simply seeks power over the other Fae, and the austere Conclave, who are like assassins, spies, and kind of keep the council having a reputation. Overall, my sense is that they simply want to present an alternative to the courts, which is partially why they draw in a lot of Solstice and Changeling Fae. And I wonder if this is almost supposed to be like the incipient Seelie, Unseelie Shadow division.
I see the Patron Council as the Shadow Court. Like, if you're trying to do this as prehistory to Changeling, and we'll get into that later, and I think there's a lot of issues with that, but if you were to, the Patron Council seems like it's designed to be what eventually becomes the Shadow Court to me.
Yeah, I also see threads that connect to Seelie and Unseelie out of the Shadow Court, which makes it even more interesting to me. I don't know that it really flies, but I can see that intention underneath. But it is very confusing overall.
Yeah, we should at some point, once we get into the court chapter, we'll get into like how we think the courts fit with Seelie and Unseelie, and even make some allusions to that.
There's also a sidebar on the Coterie of Drael, a group that supposedly sparked the War of Seasons. Okay. So then, the state of the world.
Yeah, I don't think we explicitly said this. There's the 4 seasonal courts were at war. And then there was this oath truce for 100 years, and it's coming near to the end. And if you violate the powerful oaths, if you violate the oath truce, you get really smacked down hard. So most people
Yes.
are not violating it, except for maybe in some weird technical ways. But the oath truce is ending soon.
Yeah.
And it means everyone's going to go to war.
I hadn't brought it up yet because all of the history is backloaded at the
Mhm.
end of this chapter for reasons passing understanding. So,
There's a lot of repetition in this book, too.
that too, yeah. Well, before we get to the history, we have this kind of little gazetteer of different Fey realms scattered around Europe. And there's the note that the realms can be pretty easily entered, so humans might stumble in. But then we get Spring Court, which we're told is mostly humanist, with the rest being militant or Constantinian. They're desperate for change of any kind, even if that means war. And the two examples we get are the Court of the Griggling Apple, who brews cider near Bordeaux, and the Promise of the Fairy Well, ruled by the firstborn White Lady, who likes to heal village children. Good for her. Then Summer is sort of grimly eager for the coming war so that they can seize holdings, especially against the Solstice and the patrons. There's the mostly militant Court of the Valiant Forge in Britain, ruled by none other than Wayland Smith. And in Egypt, the Ocean of Dust, which is home to many staunchly traditionalist in anime and Firstborn. The Autumn Court is bitterly divided about how to proceed because they worry about the aftermath. They wish to adapt, especially the Constantinians and the Changelings among them. The example ones we get are the Kashalyi gatherings, spread over 9 different domains in Eastern Europe. They like to carefully and intentionally reveal themselves to humans. And meanwhile, the Chill Court of the Water Wraith are Scottish changelings and their parents who like drowning people.
I should do.
As one does. Lastly, there's Winter. They don't really seem bothered by the upcoming probability of war. They're content to maintain their roles as monsters.
They seem kind of annoyed by it, actually. Like,
Yeah, it's
fine.
yeah, I guess.
But not like they're like brutally opposed. They're just like, that sounds annoying.
Yeah, it's like we just want to run around and eat people. They hold the Black Road tunnels under Scotland, where they have oaths with miners, and they are linked to the patrons. And the Calicansarai court in southern Italy, who are thieving troublemakers, but also well-trained soldiers. There's a lot of effort here put into like the political webs of intrigue around the status of things, but I just kind of want to know more about folklore and religion in these different places. Like I was expecting kind of, oh, okay, this court is located here. Tell me something about that place. Maybe they just decided because there were other Dark Ages setting books to cover those places, they didn't need to. But
I think too, like you can just this book is flexible enough too. The way things work, it doesn't need to really have the folklore in it a lot of the time. Like there's some little bits of things,
I suppose.
ideas.
For myself, though, I like having that as a storyteller. Having a book of storyteller secrets equivalent.
But if you're gonna just do your core book, I think having
I guess so. The other sense that I get from it is, and again, we could do a whole separate discussion about this book as being kind of a halfway point between Changeling the Dreaming and Changeling the Lost in different ways. But I feel like the game kind of wants to be separated from the goings-on of the mortal world. Like, you don't really need to know who the king of whatever realm is, because to the Fae, it doesn't really matter so much.
Yeah.
And that's at variance with the other Dark Ages games, but I guess it can work.
Well, the king of the other, like, you mean the human king?
Yeah, like, you can run a Dark Ages Fae game completely divorced from the historical, geographic, and political details and everything.
But I think Dark Ages in general, you can do that with a lot of the games.
I think it depends on the game.
Yeah.
Like Werewolf, you can also do that with.
Yeah, and Mage, you can.
Mage, I think it's tougher. Vampire, I think, is the toughest. Or maybe Inquisitor. I haven't tried Inquisitor.
No, well, actually, Inquisitor, I like Inquisitor, actually. That's another, at least as antagonist. But it's even harder to get people to play an Inquisitor game.
Oh.
It's like, hey, a bunch of friends who are neo-pagans, like, hey, do you want to play Dark Ages Inquisitors with faith powers? You're like, no, I do not. Stop asking.
Hard pass.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we get to the history. So,
yep.
The firstborn formed bodies for themselves and weaved the mists into the world around themselves to have a home. So that's nice. There was that little bit about how they created like water, fire, air, stone, sand. And it reminded me of the Eddie Izzard bit where he's talking about the creation of the world. It's like, and God created jam and cabbages and tobogganing and Rwanda. So anyway, The inanimate then arose when that incipient world mixed with the pockets of the mists still floating around. And the Firstborn were happy about that at first, but then annoyed that they couldn't control these new Fae.
Yeah.
So
The Fae came first, and they were sentient, and then the inanimate came. Like there were no animals, I think, even at this point. That's why you don't have inanimate animals, I guess.
Yeah. There's a note that the inanimate oppose the Firstborn because they have an actual stake in the world, which I thought was an interesting contrast. So then there was what was called the Great Unleashing to try and potentially reset the world to pure magic. Like, okay, just etch a sketch this. And that failed, and they accidentally created life instead. Whoops. So the Firstborn organized the courts in relation to their attitudes towards life, where winter kind of rejected it, spring embraced its cycles, summer embraced its structure, and autumn embraced its potential. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, apparently that also did a Tower of Babel type thing by creating the languages or something.
I have flagged that for inclusion in World of Darkness linguistics for the Storyteller's Vault someday. I have so many grammar notes on those courtly languages. So then humanity appeared. They fascinated the Firstborn, especially the spring ones, less so the inanimate, except the sort of fire-based ones. And there's a suggestion that Eve was Firstborn and Cain and Abel were the first changelings because we just couldn't do this book without including it.
Yeah, if you try to cross that over with vampire, that gets really weird.
Yeah, the first changeling was a redcap, clearly.
So I guess Lilith would have been like an anime or something? Yeah.
The initial conflicts between the Fae were between the origins, but then changes to the world led to each court kind of advocating different positions vis-a-vis humanity, and that became kind of like the points of disagreement.
So they're definitely caring about humanity at this point, even though later it said they didn't start caring about humanity until pretty recently. So
yeah. Well, recently to a Fae, though, I mean, that could be however many millennia.
Yep.
And then the Spring Court disrupted everything by setting the seasons and cyclic rule into motion with their own great working, followed by the others, except for the Solstice Fae, because they just opted out. They hit the opt-out button.
Yep. Then you get war.
Yeah.
4-way war.
War of Seasons, because the seasons just can't get along. To their credit, the Fae realized almost immediately that their fights would probably tear the world apart. So they left it in the charge of the humans with the gold oaths, kind of.
Yeah, and then they went somewhere. Which is never described as we're somewhere. There's Fae realms, but those are like freeholds, basically, like big freeholds you hide in.
The wild, perhaps?
Yeah, they don't really get into where it would be. Yeah, you have to fill in the blanks on that one. I don't think it ever describes where they went.
The dreaming analog.
Yeah.
Whatever that might be called. I mean, maybe it was intended to be like a tie-in to Denizens of the Dreaming. They just left it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm not entirely clear what it was supposed to be.
But one of the first gold oaths that they swore with humans was the source of the weakness to iron. So that's where we get that from.
Oh, there's also sacred oaths that were pre-gold oaths that were between the Firstborn and some elder fairy creature.
Yeah.
I don't know, the Tuatha De Danann and Fomorians, is that who those?
But sure.
Yeah.
Listen, if I can't take dots in it, I don't care what it is.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the heron women and the crab men. I don't know.
Yeah. So then we get a few examples of battles. These include the Blood Peace, which isn't actually a battle, just kind of a piece of trickery to establish autumn domination and create a tie-in to Dark Ages Vampire in, I think, Lithuania, was it?
The Baltics get a lot of coverage in the Dark Ages games, by the way.
They really do. I think my guess is that's because they are famously the last part of Europe to be Christianized.
Yeah, when I did run Dark Ages Fae, I had a Latvian player in it, so that was fun.
Okay. We also have the War of Silver and Iron, which was Fae versus werewolves in Britain, and the Fae were kind of like, this is costing us way too much for victory, so they just stepped away from that. The Battle of Ice, which was an actual single battle, and the Battle of Stone, which was the big one, with all four courts struggling for weeks or possibly years, no one's quite sure, and most of their leaders falling or vanishing, and the outcome of that. And that was like the last big battle of the war before the Oath Truce came together.
I find it interesting with all this depiction of battles, and Dark Ages does kind of have a vaguely similar to what we got in War and Concordia, like an actual war system in one of the books.
Yeah.
No mention of anything like that. Like using that.
Yeah.
It's like, don't even try.
Well, it raises the question for me, how much of this is really necessary to know his backstory if like you can't even find a way to mechanize it and it's all just...
But there's supposed to be maybe a giant battle showing up in 1230. So.
Yeah, at some point in the future, yeah. There is a canonical connection to Changeling the Dreaming in here because they reference the Glastonbury Compact, the alliance between mages and fae. But when they came back to Earth, they were like, what's with all these humans smithing and praying?
Which is confusing me, because when they left, there was a bunch of humans smithing and praying, weren't there? Like,
But they were smithing different alloys and praying to multiple gods, and that's what's changed.
were they? Okay, when did they actually leave, roughly?
Unclear. It's deliberately left unclear, which is
Like,
you know,
but I got the impression it was like after like Alexander the Great or something.
your guess is as good as mine because I couldn't find a specific reference.
Yeah, sorry. The Battlestone came 3 more centuries after the Battle of Ice, around the time that Constantine I converted to Christianity. This is like well into the Roman Empire, when they're still doing the War of Seasons.
Right, but the Battle of Ice wasn't the first battle.
No, but the war was happening during...
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, I meant the bit after the war when they left.
Oh, I thought they left. I think they left for the war. Like, when the war started is when they left. Because they were like, we're going to have these giant magical battles. It's going to unmake the world. Let's have them over in the Dreaming.
Oh, I'm thinking of the Dimming.
Oh, the dim years, yeah.
So that was well into the Roman Empire, and maybe even after the fall of the Roman Empire.
So when they came back to Earth, things were...
So they had their own Dark Ages, same as Europe. Huh?
Yeah. And then what crystallized the need for the oath truce was a gold oath was violated by the humans through crude sorcery. And they were like, whoa, okay, we need to pause this war for 100 years and figure out what to do about these humans.
Yep.
The oath truce entails no court armies. That bit is magically enforced. No killing in the name of court, and no slaying other fae except in duels. And that's the present situation.
Oh, and if you violate the oath truce, you're now outlaw.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, this is a lengthy chapter. It's a lot of history and politics to kind of dump right out of the gate, in my opinion. Have you used any of this when you've done Dark Ages Fae?
I only did the one, and it was just vague in the backstory. I mean,
okay.
You are playing characters who some of them easily could have lived through all this, so it's kind of... And I think it would be very not difficult to run something during this period. So
yeah, I can't imagine the mechanics are that different. Just Firstborn turning other Firstborn into shrubbery and such.
Yep. We'll get into that later.
I will return to this example.
I did want to bring up, I remember from all the top of courts. So it does say on page 46 that the humans had the word Seelie for the Summer Fae and Unseelie for the Winter Fae. And I think if you were trying to relate this to the 2 Changeling courts, I do think the Summer Fae are definitely Seelie and the Winter Fae are definitely Unseelie, but they're the extremist antagonist kind, like the Duke Dreys on the Summer and like the Redcap that just wants to hide out and eat you, or some of the really nasty Baelor or something like that would be Winter Fae.
Yeah.
But the Spring and Autumn, I don't think... They both have a lot of Seelie and Unseelie in them, so...
Well, we've talked about this a bit before. So, like, spring is all about change, which I associate with Unseelie.
Yeah.
And when you look at the traditional division of the year, winter and spring are Unseelie.
Well, the season of spring's kind of split in half by the Seelie and Unseelie part of the year, and the fall season's kind of split in half by the Seelie and Unseelie.
I would say that's astronomical season, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, but even like European weather seasons too.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the blooming time and the stirring of life. The spring equinox is 6 weeks before the transition from Unseelie to Seelie. And then like it goes back when all the harvesting is done.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the agricultural... Unseelie is about the stillness of winter and then the stirring of spring.
Yeah. It's not properly summer when Beltane happens. Like, that's still definitely spring.
I mean, yeah, but, you know, I don't think any of these... I don't think we can do hard boundaries to begin with.
Yeah, but also, the Spring Fae, they're very Unseelie in some ways and very Seelie in other ways. Like, they're definitely all about musing and cultivating, and they wouldn't like ravaging, for instance, I don't think.
Well, they're transitional,
Yeah, that's what I just meant. They're like both of them, both the autumn and spring are very... You could take your more nuanced Seelie or Unseelie, and it could fit into either of those 2 courts. So,
for more about seasonal courts, see the Storyteller's Vault supplements Roots of Legend and/or Book of Days.
And that specifically, are those the same though as... these courts have very distinct things to them. Like when we did also, didn't they have 4 seasons in that fan supplement we did? Or was that only 2?
Book of Days?
No, not Book of Days. No, the one that we did an episode on.
Oh, Celtic Cycle.
Yeah, Celtic Cycle. Didn't that? Actually, I'd say this book also feels like Celtic Cycle in some ways. So.
Yeah. So Dina McKinney and Buck Markington, who worked on Celtic Cycle, were both authors for this one. So presumably a lot of those ideas found their way in.
Yep.
But that's chapter 1.
Chapter 2. I kind of like this intro story.
Yes. Solstice Fae conscripts away some sprites from his firstborn host.
And then they just eat the firstborn horse. So.
Wah, wah. So this is the chapter where we get some usable character and game information, beginning with Origins.
And this is interesting because they give you a lot of books don't do this. It's like actually describing the format of the chapter, like each of the origins, and tells you like this is the title, this is the quote, this is the overview.
Thanks, book. So the Changelings are, as you alluded to, one of several different actual metaphysical categories. They can be firstborn who grow up among humans and, quote, gain a human soul, which I'm not entirely sure what that is supposed to mean here. Or they can be human infants abducted to grow up among the Fae.
Who lose a bit of their soul.
Or enchanted human servants who get more Fae over time. So that's a bit of the Changeling Lost angle there.
Or they're the child of a firstborn and a human, which only goes for one generation. 2 changelings cannot make I don't know what a changeling and a firstborn would make, but
a kinane.
Well, a changeling and a changeling do make something kind of like kinane. It talks about like fairy touch. They don't give any details on them, but they sort of allude to it.
So if a changeling grows up among humans, they eventually discover what they are through unleashing.
Unless they're baptized.
More on that later. Socially, I guess they kind of fill the role of commoners in the sense that the firstborn kind of look down on them, but they're useful for interacting with humanity, and some of their fellows believe the future lies with them.
The very common commoners. It actually reminds me a lot of the October Day series, actually. The Changelings. A similar social role there.
They can alternate between their human and Fae appearance. They never become quite as alien or elemental as the firstborn or an anime and remain basically humanoid.
Yeah.
They're also less affected by echoes, and they have one less Dominion dot / are unable to unleash while in human form. More on that when we get to the magic system.
They also have beginning mists of 2, beginner weaving of 4, beginning dominions 2.
Kind of a disadvantage when you convert it into dreaming terms.
Yeah. Although weaving's a lot more useful than banality in Changeling, so.
Yeah. So then we get a firstborn who seems to be wearing what would you call that? Like pebble armor and carrying some kind of shamisen blade.
I think I drew a dragon with those scales once in middle school, but
yeah, I do like the sort of brambly vine motif.
What kind of instrument's that?
It's like the sword from Final Fantasy, except it's also a lute.
I'm not really sure but he's also got a sword.
It's got like a little spike at the end. I guess that could be for either propping it up or stabbing someone.
Yeah, I'm all for firstborn having like the most over-the-top fantasy weapons in our equipment.
Fair. So these ones sprang from the mists as true Fae, but now they have kids who are,
also true Fae.
Who are also true Fae.
Yeah.
They're kind of like the nobles in that they have a strict hierarchy. They're afraid of humanity's potential, and although they are usually humanoid, they're always kind of horrifying or astonishing with weird effects kind of floating around them. And they don't have any natural human form. They acquire one through magic or the mists, and they practice creating it by abducting humans and studying them. So that's gross.
Just consent is not a thing in this game.
No.
Like,
well,
socially.
And indeed in many parts of the Dark Ages series.
Yeah.
But the Firstborn have an easier time unleashing, and they're more sensitive to echoes because they're so magical.
And they're also beginning Miss 4, beginning Weaving 2, beginning Dominions 3.
So many Dominions. Lastly, the Inanime. And I really like the indication here that they are not elementals. They are Fae who assume the forms of elemental phenomena. So contrasting with spirits proper.
Yeah, but they're also made of the element, like physically.
Yeah. They're usually spontaneously generated by elemental forces, which is pretty cool. But they can also mate and reproduce.
But that's a great shame to do that.
Your mom was a blizzard. So the Inanime's first act is usually to assume a human shape, and having that consistency enables them to do weavings. They used to be kind of second class, but have long since taken their place in Fae society while also
Yeah.
maintaining their own.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. There's like the true Fae are still the nobility, or maybe the true Fae are the royalty and they're the nobility. Like they're like still they're not commoners by any stretch, but they're not like
They're like the foreign envoys that you have to treat like nobility, is how I feel.
yeah. And then the changelings are the filthy commoners. But
Yes. Peasants. The anatomy are not yet tied to specific anchors, and they're better at interacting with humans than Firstborn.
mhm,
Their appearance is shaped by their elemental origin and is indistinguishable from humans in human form, but they can also break down and reshape their bodies and have greater
mhm.
features, which we'll get to.
Play with one greater feature accessible only in their Fae mains.
Yep,
Extra power things.
yep. But they also accumulate echoes more easily.
Yeah. Their echo effects are sort of in between the two other
Yeah.
origins. I like that there's a lot of stuff on blood in here. You can tell that there's the vampire crop.
Yeah.
Vampires do not want to try to feed from it in anime. That's pretty clear. Unless you want a mouthful of mud or something.
Or fire.
Or fire. Yeah, that would be the most fun.
I do wonder if there shouldn't be a little bit more breakdown in these. Like, they are complicated already, but I think it would be good to have kind of more indication of like, how does a water anatomy differ from a fire anatomy? How
Mhm.
does a firstborn of this temperament differ?
Well, the personality things is just all over the place, right?
Yeah.
But the features, I think, are mechanically how you differentiate them.
Yeah, I suppose that's what we have to work with.
Yeah, the beginning Mist 3, beginning Weaving 3, beginning Dominions 3, balanced.
The Goldilocks Fae.
Yeah.
And then we get to the courts, which
The heading of a shattered society. That's awesome.
yeah, on the nose. So the court shapes a Fae's ethos, approach to life, their choice of magic in the sense of their affinity for certain dominions, and different sort of social and political factors. The breakdown that we're given here is that each write-up tells us about their seining, the way they ornament their Fae mean, oaths, strongholds, leaders, types of echoes, favorite dominion. But I guess we could just kind of give some overview.
Yep.
Starting with spring.
Man, this pictures the height of sexual but not sexy.
Yeah.
Or trying to be. Yeah.
Sexy leper lady.
Well, if you're into sort of like she's got like bird feet, but she's also like looks like a corpse that's been in the water too long.
If you're into sinew.
Mm-hmm. She's got some slua thing going on, but not quite as skinny.
So the spring court is all about change in all things. They're the most protective of humanity because they see it as a symbiotic relationship, and therefore they're pretty accepting of changelings and mostly humanists.
Well, that's another thing. Like, if you were to put them between weaving and mists, these are actually one of the most weaving Fae, despite being all about change. So it's very
Yeah. Their seinings are impassioned affairs with loose boundaries until the 3 trials at the end. And their oaths are geared towards assisting humankind in return for help or privacy. Seems pretty straightforward. Mostly based in Western Europe, whose folklore shapes their echoes. See, like, that's the kind of thing where I want to know more about. And they do give some examples, but and then the springers usually have an unassuming or disarming appearance with hidden chaos inside.
Mm-hmm.
And they favor dawn as their magic.
Yep. The summer court.
Tradition, dignity, oaths.
Yeah, they're like uber Gwydion,
Yeah.
basically.
Lots of militants, very few truce bearers. They feel that they're destined for victory in the upcoming war, and
they still kind of be like, ugh, changelings, you.
Yeah. Their seining is tutoring and combat training, and then lots of menial labor. So not so fun.
Yeah, these are also the most she in general.
Yeah. Sealy she in particular.
Yeah.
Their oaths tend to reward their bound mortals who behave in the face of temptation, and they have few but powerful strongholds around kind of the edges of Europe. So North Africa, West Asia, the British Isles. Devastatingly beautiful. And they don't like somber rituals, and they don't like faith, but they like the dominion of day.
Yeah, they're even repelled by a lot of pagan rituals still.
As they should be.
Yeah. The Autumn Court.
I love their icon.
It's very similar to a maple leaf, but
yeah, they're the Canadian court
that are always dressed like they look like should be in the Ali Batain.
That's a fine.
Yeah, but just all the pictures are like that. That's what.
Yeah.
Despite them holding in other places.
So they're all about sort of foresight, and they're less concerned with war and power than preparing for what comes after. And they know that whatever comes after, it's going to be dominated by humans. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of changelings and a lot of Constantinians in the mix.
Yeah, they're not really big on the war even. Like they're also going, maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. Their sanings are somber and reflective trainings under dignitaries and diplomats. They don't do that menial labor stuff like the summer court. But I do like how their oaths tend to be kind of like Faustian pacts.
Yep. Yeah, I get strong Elanid vibes from this too.
Yeah, I could see that, yeah. They're scattered around Eastern Europe and West Asia. They're vulnerable to faith and irritating smells and sounds. Appearance wise, they blend in with humans, but there's often something odd about them. And they favor the Dusk Dominion.
Isn't this the one that has like the most changelings in it?
That sounds like a yes, possibly followed only by Spring.
Spring's trying to actively have changelings. This is just like changelings join them.
Yeah. And then Winter, everyone's favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And by everyone's favorite, I mean nobody likes them. But they don't like anybody in turn, so it's, they're all about terror.
Yeah. This is the thing where people are like, oh, how could you possibly have like a Thaline PC game? And I'm like, whatever your answer here, you'd also need that for Winter Court, I think.
Yeah. But they're realists ultimately, and their sort of hesitation about the war is because they're like, winning the war isn't going to help us. They're not mindless killers.
Yeah.
They're just like, they think about their own needs.
And they don't like war. They might like
Yeah.
killing, but not war.
Exactly. And eating in particular.
Yeah, there's a lot of red cap vibes in this whole court.
Yeah. Very few changelings, very cruel saning process. Blunt, difficult oaths, often punished by death when they're broken. Usually live alone, usually defended by savage monsters. These are like the ogres who live up in the mountains, kind of.
An extra creepy looking Famian.
Yeah. They hate singing.
Yep.
And they like Night Dominion.
And then there's the Solstice Fae. And if you're talking, we were talking earlier about over the top fantasy armor.
Yeah. But, I'm into it.
Yeah, these are the ones who are not in a court. A lot of earlier things here are like they deliberately did not join a court. Later we get things where they almost all were in a court, and then so that's a little bit confusing.
Got kicked out.
Yeah.
Spring pities them, summer despises them, autumn ignores them, winter hates them.
Yeah, but because of the Oath Truce especially, the Oath Truce only applies to the courts. If you're a Solstice Fae, it doesn't apply to you. So you can raise an army, you can be hired by someone of the courts to go do some assassination or war or something. Although the Oath Truce doesn't protect you from them, the other courts either. So
they have scattered holdings, increasingly under the control of the patrons. They're repelled by folk remedies. They rarely hold oaths, but when they do, it's usually for self-protection, and they're narrow in scope.
Yeah, they're poor in magic, like in the wealth of the Fae, they're poor. In terms of money, they might still be rich.
And good vibes. Yeah, any closing thoughts about Chapter 2 before?
Yeah, I think it's a good summary of everything. It definitely, at this point, if you're reading it, going like, it's hard for me to think of how to do cross-court games after reading this part.
Yeah. I like it. I mean, I like the system, but if there had been any supplements for this, like I said, the one I think it could have benefited most from is an intercourt, the Book of the Four Courts or whatever.
Yeah, and just in general, we get to Storyteller chapter later, but it's still like, how do you use all this in your game? There's so much.
So much. Too much, maybe. But that's Chapter 2.
Brings us to Chapter 3, Characters in Drama. And then we get into even more details about the scenings and fostering and...
Yeah. But we do get the specific note that the Fae half dies when baptized, when a changeling is baptized. So, yeah, the Firstborn get magical education, hierarchical education, etc. And the Inanimate get, like, Waldorf school. It's just like...
Yeah. But it's also like
wonderful.
The Firstborn start out sometimes as the sprites. I get a little bit confused by that, how that works.
I guess because, the sprites, like Chimera, are spawned from pure magic, and if they accrue enough will and self-actualization, they can birth themselves into Firstborn.
Although we get rules later for sprites, and they're literally just using spirit rules. So.
Yeah. Again, things that would have been nice to expand had they put out more books. So yeah, details on the basics for creating a Fae.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing this is, like, the childhood is very much not court focused. It's origin focused.
Differentiates them. Yeah, because saning it's more like confirmation than baptism in the Catholic sense. You think through and choose which court you're going to join, even though it's expected you'll join the one that raised you.
Yeah. And you might get eaten if it's you don't choose winter
Right.
if you're raised by them.
Winter, join or else. So the basics here, it kind of gives us not really like physiology stuff, or it's like basic social things that would be common knowledge among the Fae, which was actually kind of
Hmm.
useful. So like how their worldview is generally alien, or how age is shaped by the slowing of time and heritage in the context of the war, things like that.
And one helpful thing is make sure to read Thinking Medieval, page 126 in Dark Ages Vampire. This is one of the examples in this book where they were able to sort of offload word count to things already written
Yeah,
for the other.
I guess is fine.
I mean, I don't like that write up that they're
Yeah.
referencing, but it's, yeah.
If it opens up the page count for more useful things, that's
Hmm.
fine. It's debatable whether they effectively used all of their pages here.
Yeah. And then they eventually did come out with like sort of Mortal book for free you can download still. So,
Yeah,
somewhere between a Mortal book for free and like the original World of Darkness from Chronicles of Darkness. And somewhere between that and an SRD, I'd say.
perhaps the link can be included in the show notes.
Hmm.
Anyway, we get notes on the different types of solstice,
Hmm.
love and weddings, nourishment, iron mechanics.
Yeah. I should say there's a lot of stuff in this book that would have content warnings all over the heck. Like before reading this book, like there's very little concept of consent or like just lots of bad things happening to people throughout this. But yeah, there's stuff like dietary requirements.
I like it though. I mean, I like
Yeah,
this. Yeah, think through the weird, flower petals and cricket legs that your character has to eat to stay nourished.
yeah.
Like I'm into it.
This reminds me a lot of that in the Enchanted book, the
Hmm.
chapter that was not about the Enchanted, but it was about like Fey society.
Yeah,
This reminds me a lot of that.
it's good to have. I'm happy. It's
Yeah, and I like the Beauty and the Beast style wedding photo. Except I don't think the expectation is the boar guy will change into anything after they get married. So,
But I think they're both content with that.
mhm.
And it's Melissa Uran art that looks good in black and white, so I'm into it. Then. Anyway, then we get the character creation summary, and as pointed out, this is not a core book, so you would need Dark Ages Vampire or some other core
Mhm.
book to kind of have all the things.
But it's a pretty standard character creation summary.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. So they sort the options for concept into profession based, thematic based, and literature based. And I actually kind of like that. I want to
Yeah.
briefly give a shout out to the Dark Ages or World of Dark Ages podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes to their 2 episodes on Dark Ages Fae, which they go through the book in forensic detail. But one of the things I remember them pointing out that I really liked is how this game is very, I think they say, mythologically consistent.
Hmm.
And I like that as a guiding principle. And I think it shines through here because there is so much variation. Like I said, origin and court, we don't get a lot of granularity with what you're supposed to do with that. So you kind of have to rely on your concept to think about what makes your Fae distinct. And I
Yeah.
think this is a good tool to do that.
I think the system also helps back that up because I know one criticism I hear of Changeling in comparison to some of the other Fey White Wolf books,
Mhm.
games, and if you think this is important, I agree, and they do make use of well here. You can take a Fey concept, then read through the setting and rules, and you can make that. If your character was like a good concept for some sort of Fey,
Yeah.
you're going to be able to make that character.
Yeah.
You don't have to start with the setting and be like, well, it doesn't really. Are you really a Puka or Boggin? Or, yeah.
And we could talk later about sort of the trend towards individualism as we move from
Hmm.
dreaming to lost.
Yeah.
So then the mechanical steps, this is just what you would expect. Pick your origin and your
Yeah.
court, your nature and demeanor,
Yeah. I
pick
mean,
your attributes and abilities.
quite frankly, they could have just given me the summary and then not done this
Right.
character creation.
Yeah, it is a little weird that it's like, oh, this isn't a core book, so you'll need a core book. But here, let's rehash the things in the core book.
Yeah. And the long form writing takes up less of the page than the summary.
How about that?
So we get some new abilities,
Yes. Kenning instead of empathy because they just don't get humans.
but you can use canning like empathy, which I was like, that's an interesting idea. I might want to use on a very Denizens game or something.
Enigmas. It's just surprising it
Yep.
hadn't popped. I guess it's probably abilities that differ from vampire, because I have to imagine Enigmas is in mage.
Yeah, I gotta look at Dark Ages Man. They're one companion. And then Grey Mary, it's actually very nailed down in terms of things. A lot of things it can do. So
Yeah. You get actual oath mechanics too.
hmm but you need like this dot in Grey Mary to do this kind of oath and this kind of treasure.
Yep.
And stuff.
And then backgrounds from Dark Ages Vampire, you can do allies, contacts, influence, mentor, resources, and status. And the new ones include holdings, which is poolable by a party with points to build the different aspects of your holding.
This is your holdings, like holdings and changeling. It's your freeholdish thing.
Then library, which costs double but eases experience point costs. Oaths that you carry, I guess, as a starting character.
Yeah, I actually thought with the library, I'm like, maybe they should have like 1 point if it's just Fey library, but maybe the whole war destroying thing makes sense.
The oaths can mitigate echoes or help you regain weaving points. You can have a retinue of humans, as in Changeling the Dreaming. You can have sprites, which I guess are a narrow version of Chimerical Companion, although, as you said, they use spirit mechanics.
I don't know how narrow. Like, it's very similar to Chimerical Companion.
Yeah. And then treasures.
Yeah.
More on those later. We get a passel of merits and flaws, some of which you can see the descendants of elsewhere. So, like, you have the crafted flaw for the inanime, and that's eventually becomes the crafted.
Yep. Your angelic. I had a player in the game I ran. He had a angelic merit and then the amnesia flaw and something else, and he thought he was a
actual angel.
He was angel, yeah. Which is actually not that off when you read some of this other stuff here. It's like, oh no, that actually makes sense. Like, if somebody getting confused and thinking he might be an angel in one of the stories. So. I think for a White Wolf book, the merits and flaws are, on the whole, pretty good.
I agree. Then we get the mists, which are sort of the glamour equivalent. Uses include enchantment, or I guess the equivalent of enchantment, the equivalent of calling upon the weird, and actively hiding from mortals. So the mists don't automatically cover up your fey wheelings and dealings. You actually have to choose to like draw them around you.
Well, it's interesting. Your cantrips and unleashing are all, in changeling terms, weird, and then you have to spend mists to make them basically chimerical. Or they make the cantrips chimerical. You can't do it to mists.
And you regain mists points by unleashing, which I love.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was kind of neat.
And then weaving, on the other hand, is sort of the banality equivalent, with uses including controlling your unleashings, countering cantrips, forging oaths, suppressing the mists, and reducing echoes. I like the idea of incorporating some of this into, like, I don't know, like a useful banality system, you know, having banality be able to do more things than just repel chimerical stuff.
Like, I could actually see, if I was running a Dark Ages Changeling game, looking to this mists and weaving rules for some inspiration for handle glamour and banality a bit differently than in the modern day. But
as a shameless tie-in to the ongoing Changeling 30th anniversary project, I will mention that I flagged a few of these things for possible inclusion in the Book of Grimaire that we're working. So, and then just like in C20, you can have imbalance
in both directions.
In both directions, when one temper exceeds the other by 3, and there's similarly like warning signs and triggers as with Bedlam and banality.
This is actually one of the bits that distantly reminded me of the Hessian.
Yeah.
This and some of the magic rule stuff, like Dominions, a little bit. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of like dealing with being locked or lost, and
I had to put it somewhere.
And then we get the bits that I remember everyone on the internet loving.
Yes.
About this book, the features
for constructing your fey mean. There's the cosmetic lesser ones, and then the things that give you powers greater ones, with not a lot of storyteller guidance, honestly.
Yeah, there's not a lot of them. I would have liked way more of these. Yeah. Like, we get too many cantrips and not enough features, I think.
Something else for the storyteller's fault.
But these also kind of remind me of, it's almost like they took from the apocalyptic form in Demon the Fallen.
How about that? In this case, we can say they might have cribbed from Demon the Fallen.
Yep.
That I'm comfortable with. Maybe this is a moment to bring up the thing that I had mentioned before we did this recording about my sense of the Changeling fan base, that shift in, I don't know how to describe, I guess, collectivism to individualism. I don't know how to frame it. But yeah, that shift, the idea of when you're creating a character, thinking about, here's how my character fits into a group that accepts me. And then that's, I feel, changed into more, I'm going to make myself as distinct as possible.
Yep.
and assume that everyone is going to accept it. Like, it's interesting, and I don't know if it's something about how we've evolved as a culture in the last 20 or 30 years or something, but I don't know. It's
I mean, that's kind of distinct in changeling related things. I wouldn't say that's been gaming, role playing game shift necessarily.
specifically within the fan culture then for Changeling.
Yeah.
I think I see a lot more people now who want their characters to be as far away from the splat as they can possibly get while still technically being in it.
Yeah. I remember a lot of that when I got into changeling. That could also be.
Maybe, yeah, maybe it's just my experience, but it's been noticeable for
Yeah.
me.
And I think one issue in this book actually has is, I mean, Changeling also has this problem, but like this needs it even more. It doesn't help you do session zero. Why the heck are all these PCs
Yeah.
actually having anything to do with each other?
Yeah.
You could have more writing. It's not like you'd need to change the rules or anything or the setting. But I think I would have really liked some more advice on how to do that. Would be helpful with a lot of people.
Yeah. In any case, if that is a trajectory that has occurred over the course of the various Changeling themed games, I see this as kind of because I know people often point to Lost as like you have such free reign to construct your character in
Yeah.
whatever direction. And this is kind of at the midpoint between that and the very here are the nine kiths, pick one kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this might even be more free reign than Lost has.
Well, Lost also had more text to work with. Lost actually did go
That's true.
into extensive detail about
Yeah, if you
everything.
just look at the Lost core book,
Yes.
there's more options in Lost, but that's more like changing the dreaming with your like 100+ kiths. But
I don't know. We'll have to talk about this when we talk about
hmm
Lost in however many episodes,
yeah.
because I'm just flagging it now as something that I'm going to keep
hmm
on my mind.
And then we get into the oaths again.
Yeah, mutual benefits.
There's a lot of repetition here.
But here we actually have the categorization of the gold oaths, which are the big ancient ones sworn with humanity
Mm.
or at large or large groups that require Grammar 5. Stone oaths, which are also old and powerful, but sworn with like households and families, and then the iron oaths that are common and simple with individuals or small groups.
Oh, by the way, it says Grimoire 5 only if you recover the lost secret and you have Grimoire 5.
Yes, gold oaths are tough.
Mm-hmm.
So creating them and determining their level requires 5 factors: what the Fae must do, what the human does in return, how the Fae keeps the oath, how the human keeps the oath, and the punishments
Mm-hmm.
for breaking it.
That's
So
a nice little system, I think. I haven't used it. I don't know if it works well, but
yeah, and they give examples for each, which is also nice. Although
mm-hmm.
it does still feel a little bit like something that's listed as 4 dots. I'm like, really, that should only be 2, and vice versa. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same issue that you have with like the gaze flaw or something.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more examples would also be nice too,
Mhm.
because it's hard to draw the conclusion from.
More for the vault.
Mm-hmm.
And if you actively uphold an oath, it shields you from echoes.
Echoes. This is like if banality gave you permanent paradox flaws.
One or more of which all Fae start with.
But actually, no, it's mortal witnessing, so it's not even banality, and it's based on willpower of the mortals. So,
Yeah. Well, it's also like a trigger and effect system with
mm-hmm.
different levels of severity. It's kind of similar. The severities that the things that happen to you when you get hit by an echo, it reminds me of the standard true faith progression, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
first you're uncomfortable, then you're pushed back, then you actually get
Yeah.
injured, like that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
but if you do something vulgar in front of mortal witnesses, and there's rules for it, and they roll things, and then you get echoes, and then triggering the echoes is another rule, but you sort of keep the echoes at that point.
Yeah. Note also that only humans can trigger echoes. Fae can't
Mm-hmm.
echo each other.
But some mages count as humans, and all the inquisitors do.
Yes.
So have fun.
And you can take new echoes in exchange for more features, or if you're exposed to potential echoes while in Fae Mean.
Mm-hmm. And we get a bunch of sample echoes like religious symbols, prayers, virgins, a kiss from a beautiful woman or a handsome man, saying the Fae's names backwards, the sound of bells, touching cold iron, humans wearing clothing inside it. Like it's all the. Is it from some sort of folklore keeping away some sort of supernatural thing? There you go. Or affecting a supernatural thing? It's an echo,
Potential echo.
potentially. Mm-hmm.
Still, in terms of like balance and testing all these things, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think you
And
kind of have to decide at your table what works.
yeah. And then the echo system is like the mortal sees it, and you're going to roll 10 dice. So it gets triggered by all sorts of stuff, depending on your features and what you're doing. you start with 10 dice, you subtract 1 die for every 5 lesser features, which is like minor, weird looking thing, 1 die for every greater feature, which is the one that gives you powers, 1 die if your character's in an anime, 1 die for every 3 mortals present, 1 die if the mortal witnessed any character casting a visible cantrip during the same seed threat, 2 dice if they witnessed unleashing, and 3 dice if the unleashing went awry. So that's like
Complicated.
yeah, and like a lot of the time it's like if you do everything right and you're like not very weird looking and you're not in an anime or anything like that and there's only 1 or 2 mortals present and all that stuff and you roll it, it's like you're rolling 10 dice and difficulty 7 and nothing bad happens unless it fails or botches. So
There's a little bit of the, again, as a waypoint on the way to Changeling the Lost,
mhm,
and especially with second edition, with things like Weird and Clarity, the higher your stat is, the more severe a failure is, if I'm
mhm.
stating that correctly. So in principle, I like that, but this is really complex, and hashing it out in the middle of a scene must be hell.
Yeah, I mean I could do it. It really
Such enthusiasm.
I'm trying to remember what actually is the trigger like if is it like every what is the trigger for it again?
I mean, it's any of those traditional folklore things, right?
No, that's what triggers an existing echo. What triggers creating an echo? That's the
Oh, it's if exposed to one of those things while in Fey Mean.
could it happen multiple times a scene? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Oh, I mean, I guess so, but
If it's only once a scene, it's not too bad.
yeah. Let's say house rule. Yes, once per scene.
Mm-hmm.
We end with a few notes on raising some Fey specific traits with XP,
Mm-hmm.
which is, nice in the context of character development.
Dominions require a teacher, but there's a merit that makes it cheaper if you have the right. If the teacher can make it cheaper if they have that merit.
And some standard XP costs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's chapter 3. The one thing that I would change if I were running this game is I would say, in addition to everybody taking 1 echo, I would say everyone needs to take 1 oath. And I would give it as a free dot, but I think that adds drama.
Mm.
Anyway.
Now we have chapter 4, Dominions. This is the part I'd be doing lots of house rules from experience.
I like the opening story where Elsabet causes a landslide because humans forgot to leave her obsidian alone.
As you do. That's fair.
As you do. The obsidian oath.
Just because they don't remember the agreement doesn't mean there wasn't one.
Precisely. But yes, the Dominions. So I certainly don't think we need to go into forensic detail on this, but maybe an overview, and then can you set forth your explication of why this system is flawed? Because I know you have thoughts on this.
So it's complicated, but a lot of the complication's not during play, at least.
Yeah.
You can do it all ahead of time. So you get a whole bunch of cantrips based on a weird formula, and then there's a bunch of things that make the cantrips lower difficulty. And it's base difficulty 6, so it's
already quite potent.
If you're doing some planning, it's like getting down to difficulty 3 isn't certainly not impossible.
Yeah. I'll also point out one of the things that I said about C20 and its art and its cantrip dice pool system is the art plus realm dice pool, I think, gravitates players more towards taking fewer arts at higher levels.
Mm-hmm.
This system, you use the Dominion rating plus the attribute or ability that varies by cantrip, sort of like first edition Dreaming, but there are only 4 Dominions, so you only have... you max those out pretty quickly, and then...
But you only start with 3 points of Dominions, 2 if you're a Changeling, and you can't start above 3 at character creation. So,
nevertheless,
yeah, I did find pretty much everybody took their max points in a Dominion.
Yeah, and consider that you don't have to waste points on realms,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
yeah. But and the unleashing, they're like, oh, you wouldn't want to use unleashing all the time, but it's not that punishing. The main problem with unleashing is it's more mechanically unwieldy than C20 unleashing. So I found that a bit unwieldy and kind of annoying. But like, almost everybody has higher dice pools in the unleashing than in their cantrips, and you don't have to pick your cantrips. So
yeah, I do like the rules around creating new cantrips. I will say that.
Yep. So they have these common cantrips, which they then they go into domain specific cantrips. Except for the common cantrips, most of them are modified based on which domain anyway. So
there are actually useful area of effect, number of targets, and damage tables.
Yeah. No, I mean a lot of this. It's clear what to do, And it can seem, in a sense, balanced. There's definitely cantrips I like, and it's very powerful stuff.
Any favorites?
Well, I do like Mantle.
Which one is that?
A level 2 common cantrip, so every Dominion gets it, where you can change into flora or fauna related to your thing, but you still get access to your cantrips, like to your powers and stuff. The biggest problem I had in the game is based on it. It's the level 3 cantrip Shaping, where you roll Dominion plus Stamina, or you're just rolling your Dominion plus Mists if you're unleashing, which is a 1 to 10 trait. And 3 successes are needed for a complete change. No resistance roll.
So just turning people into shrubs.
Yeah, no resistance roll from anybody, including other Fae.
Do you think maybe that was just like something they forgot to put in and they actually
There's
wanted to?
and it's not just this. There's a lot of mind control powers with no resistance rolls or ability to resist. There's things like that where you look at it and you're like, I would remove or significantly scale back Shaping.
Mhm.
And there's some mists countering methods, which we'll get in later, which I think should be reflexive, and where it's unclear if it is.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole bunch of powers like Decree that don't have resistance rolls. So what I do for a lot of this is resistance rolls. And I'm like, they want to make you very powerful, but like, there's very powerful, and then there's like, oh, you have 2 very powerful Fae who won initiative.
Yeah.
They have so many new powers they could use that the other Fae can't really do anything about because they didn't win initiative.
And there's no counter magic system that's effective enough to.
Yeah. If you're going strictly by the book, the only things that can oppose these dominions are Inquisitors, because they have their own special built-in counter magic stuff that works, and they cause all the echoes and stuff. But it's like, that becomes, if your Fae are doing any kind of fighting, the only opposition they can have is Inquisitors. And that's
Not a great solution for everyone involved.
no. But I do think like it would be fixable. I'm just shocked by the playtesting that it didn't do that. It's like, what? Because they keep talking about all the, like, the book talks about like, oh, there's going to be all the wars and a lot of the things still around fighting still, and there's a lot of like example stories are like Fae still fighting each other. It's like, what? How did that work in your game?
Well, no wonder they left
if-
Earth, because obviously this would unmake everything and whatnot.
Well, not just to make everything. It's just, yeah, it's not fun to play.
Yeah.
I found.
We should probably also just briefly, I mean,
Yeah, go into what the actual dominions do.
Yep. Yeah. So
yeah,
the dominions are all kind of named after times of day and have various associations. So day, summer, noon, summer solstice. Night is winter, midnight, winter solstice. Dawn is spring, sunrise, vernal equinox. And dusk is autumn, sunset, autumnal equinox. And you get bonuses for doing things at those times as well.
I probably should give a brief. Not going to go blow by blow on the cantrips, but like Dawn does fire, light, sovereign stuff from Changeling the Dreaming, like ordering people around, vulgar mind control. Level 5, you can just make something glow with the brilliance of a sun. Another thing where they're tying into vampire a lot.
I liked Flame of the Muse at level 4, which is basically Rhapsody.
Mm-hmm. So that's it. Leonhan would also be day.
Yeah.
Dominion of Night. I mean, darkness,
cold, fear, despair.
But yeah, fear. You can.
My favorite one in Night was at level 1, Night Sounds, where you can just pick a night sound and amplify it for a target. Very simple but effective, I would say.
Like the level 2, you can talk to someone's dreams. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take on this. That makes sense for night, because that's when you're dreaming. But like shadowy stuff.
Yeah. For Dawn, you have healing, you have looking into the future, commanding earth and growing things, fertility. There's a fun one. I picked like one cantrip from each dominion that I really like.
Oh, I forgot to say for day, also a lot of illusions. Anyway, sorry.
At level 3, you have Ruins to Refuge, which is a very sort of flavorful and folkloric thing where a sort of like, decrepit outdoor space, you make it look like a well-furnished indoor space. And that's like, that's classic fairy story stuff.
Oh, actually, that reminds me. Leaves of Metal. It's a level 1 cantrip. All the dominions have it. You can turn certain items into fake money that lasts for 24 hours.
Perfect.
Day gets the gold, but you can all make like just coins and just
those capitalist firstborns.
But it's all counterfeit. So.
Yeah. And so then Dominion of Dusk is all mystery and spirits and travel and ghosts and whatnot.
Yeah, if you're doing a Dark Ages Mage crossover and somebody's playing Ali Bettine and someone else is playing like a Lots of Dusk, it's like, a very similar power set here, don't you?
The one that might be like, this might deserve its own trigger warning or something, or content warning. Broken Mirror at level 1, where you cause someone to fail to recognize their own reflection. I'm like, holy cats, that's really,
Yeah, it's level 1. And
that would be really unsettling and destabilizing to a person.
yeah, and again, no resistance roll, but at least this only lasts a month. Level 1 cantrip.
Yeah, only 1 month.
And again, you can do it to the other character, like the player characters are just as vulnerable as anyone else. So it's like,
Yeah, I still like it though. I still think it's a good story.
yeah, just there's some scaling
Yeah,
things here.
but that's also like, I was always annoyed how, for example, in Dark Ages Vampire, or Vampire the Dark Ages, I should say, because I did play the original, but
Well, it's now called Vampire the Dark Ages 20th Anniversary Edition.
well, I haven't played that one. I've only played the second edition.
But they went back to the name.
Yeah, as they should. But like something like dementation, and it probably was the case in the original too, where it was like inflame someone's passions to an uncomfortable and distracting degree for like a year. You're like, wait, this is a whole one.
Yep.
So, but I like how in these write-ups, each level of each dominion gets a general framework for what cantrips are there, followed by the cantrips, sort of similar to the spheres in Mage.
Yeah.
The botched descriptions are glorious in many cases.
Yeah, this is slightly less magey than Dark Ages Mage, the magic system, but only slightly.
Yeah. How do these shake out compared to the division of the arts, do we think? I mean, obviously, the seasonal arts were kind of strongly influenced by this, but there's other powers mixed through.
I mean, the fact that there's only 4, I think there's a lot of overlap between what they can do.
Yeah. It doesn't map neatly, for sure.
And the power scale of it, like as much as C20 arts are powerful, it kind of all feels like unleashing in terms of the power scale. But
do you think that it kind of points you towards making different characters in the sense of like, you know, say you're choosing your arts and you're like, okay, well, if I take Primal and Soothsay and Wayfair, what kind of character does that create in a sense that's different from, okay, I'm going to take 3 dots in Day, you know?
yeah, like I really would think your question is which dominion are you going to take 2 to 3 dots in?
Yeah, basically.
Accurate. Although you get more cantrips the other way. I think I can tell them trying to balance it. You get like a certain number of cantrips per dominion. So if you have all 4 dominions, but you can get them later if you learn the dominions. So
I think it's for each dot of weaving, you have access to 1 cantrip for each dominion you possess, or something like that.
Yeah. So if you somehow had all 4 dominions at 1, like you spent a bit of bonus points or something, then you would have a ton of level 1 cantrips, sure, but
that is exactly I would probably make a Solstice character too, to be honest. And then, very randomly, on page 163, right at the end of the chapter, we have this sidebar about if your character is about to die, give them automatic successes to make them die legend. And I like that, but I have no idea why it's here. Maybe because the combat with magic would be so lopsided.
Yep.
So, overall thoughts on chapter 4?
Again, it's like, this is what I'd modify the most in this book.
Yeah. Conceptually, I really like the system.
Yeah, it's like, it feels like a, not rough draft, but it needed one more round of playtesting and drafting and fixing up.
Yeah. Very similar to, actually in a few different ways, similar to my thoughts on the magic system for Land of 8 Million Dreams, where I'm like, I like what you're going for here. I'm not sure it actually works. So.
But it reminds me a lot of Land of 8 Million Dreams because you also have like these tables to look up what you're... I mean, it's not as much as Land of 8 Million Dreams, but these tables look up what modifiers you get and stuff.
Thankfully, it's all in the character sheet.
Yep.
Chapter 5.
Yeah, Kingdoms and Quests.
We start with Hestia, and it's unclear if this is supposed to be like actual goddess Hestia watching over a child and fending off a winter fae, but then she gets driven out by maternal fear.
Yeah, no, she has an echo for baby crying, which is like, oh no, that's bad for her.
Yep. So we get some specific realms and individuals to use in a game. Okay, so we start with these strongholds, and I'm not clear if like strongholds are the same thing as realms or if they're a separate thing.
I see them as really big holdings, like a small government with a whole. They all pooled their holdings background, kind of thing.
Yeah, we get 1 for each. I think we get 1 for each court. Yeah, 1 for each court.
The Grand Bazaar,
An endless market and a paradise for thieves and merchants that appears as a tent city. The Winter Court one is probably my favorite.
Oh yeah.
This is Underbridge, which can be accessed from under any bridge, and it's like a dark dreaming kind of realm, growing rapidly as humans are building more bridges. We have the Crystal Fortress of Scandinavia, which appears as an ice palace, which is a summer court stronghold.
Yeah.
But winter is trying to take it over, and that's that little fiction we got back in chapter whatever it was, 2.
Yep. Yeah, this has the problem where this has sort of gotten to the point where it feels like the people writing this didn't read the other chapters sometimes.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this chapter, I liked this part. The second part, I certainly could have done with.
Yeah.
Then we also get the Isle of Avalon at Glastonbury, owned by the Spring Court, and that's a direct connection to Dark Ages Mage. Oh, I guess there's actually 2 Autumn Court ones, because then the last one we get is the underwater Amber Palace on the Baltic coast. It's a crossroad space. Oh, but also there's a sidebar on Trods with conditions to open them that even humans can stumble upon in this era.
Yep.
And then the little pocket realms hidden within fairy mounds. Holdings 1, perhaps. But yes, the Fading Realms.
These are cool, but not a lot of detail.
Yeah.
So you get the Lost Forest. Reminds me a little bit of the Forest of Lies.
Yeah. I really liked the Land of Youth as like a home for abducted adults that the Fae tired of. It's like, we're going to put that changeling out to pasture.
Yeah. The Frozen Lake in Burgundy is a permanently frozen lake.
With a connection to Dark Ages werewolf for reasons. And the Lost Forge of Greece with Summer Fire and Anime, who makes mythic treasures.
These are all things, both the big ones and like you could totally just steal these as ideas for Dreaming Realms.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then randomly there are these notes on Devil's Coins. I wasn't really sure what that was doing there, but
was that in the Lost Forge? Yeah, it's.
I guess so. Yeah. Although it looks like it's a separate thing. Meh. Anyway, they're not good for humans. And then there are these legends, which this is the part that I just slept my way through. Like,
Me too.
Yeah, famous faces. They're like the war leaders and the political figures and the owners of those famous holdings. And
this feels like a Changeling supplement. I do this a lot.
I guess they're only necessary in as much as this book really leans into that. I guess we can call it meta plot, even though it's only in this book. But yeah, I skipped.
And then book on what we would call prodigals.
Yes.
Lots of vampire rules.
They're viewed with condescension because they're parasites, which is the correct way to view them.
And having day or night blocks dominating presence.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Werewolves compete with the Fae over territory, and they're kind of always shifting alliances or oppositions.
I don't know why this big thing about blood, just harvesting bodies of Fae to make quintessence. Like, what? Is that a thing that mages are going to do?
Some mages, that's just how they roll. Those verbena vivisectionists, you know.
Yeah, it's like one of the most. It's like the important crossover rules are that for mage.
And then the Inquisitors are bad news with capital letters.
Yeah, even by Raw, the Inquisitors make a potent antagonist to a Changeling, to a Fae, Dark Ages Fae.
Yep.
And then we get some Creatures of the Wild.
Which I guess basically function like independent Chimera relative to the Fae.
Yeah, well, the Feral Spirits. Okay, so it's like some spirit stuff. But then there's these other things that aren't spirits. They're more like bygones.
Yeah, like Firebirds.
And it says, like, this is what, when, books like Dark Ages Mage were talking about the Fae, this is what they were really talking about. These are more what you think of as true Fae if you're thinking of Changeling the Dreaming. So it's kind of...
Well, I mean, if we think of this as pre-shattering, they are powerful Chimera who have not yet been forced out of the world by banality.
Yeah.
So you have actual giants and trolls and basilisks and the Tarkel of Underbridge, which is like a spider crossed with a squid.
Yeah, and they have the dragon here being kind of like, it's like just a monster you fight. But they did talk, it was we missed it when we did it. One of the early chapters had some dragons are technically firstborn. Okay.
Well, I assume because they are creatures who also formed themselves consciously out of magic. They were just like, we're not taking human shape. F that.
Yeah, we're dragons.
We're dragons. We're dragons.
Yep.
So, and then we get the treasures.
These are cool.
I really liked the bit on like the meanings and uses of different plants and how they could be transmuted into fairy dust of different types.
I am Dark Ages weird art combined with Fey weird art on page 187.
Yes.
Some weird Fey making a guy lick a dog's ear. What?
Yeah, I'm not going to read too much into that one.
Ha ha ha! Your tongue will be full of gross stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any favorite treasures from this bunch that we get?
There's so many of them.
I think I quite liked the Arrow of Inky Noon, just for the name.
Yep.
There's some good stuff here. Again, Storyteller Vault opportunity would be more treasures. And I quite like the notion of the oath-crafted treasures that require oaths to use. I was like, that's pretty cool.
That is cool, yeah.
There aren't enough hard and fast rules for balancing these things, but that's pretty cool.
Well, that's an idea to definitely steal for Changeling.
Yeah.
There's so many, like on page 191, this figure shows up so much. So many pages.
I mean, I guess
whatever that is.
It's on the cover as well. It's like a little offering doll. I don't know, maybe they were really into Blair Witch and wanted to have their own little something. So yeah, I mean, this chapter, it's a nice selection of things to include in a game, but not really enough guidance on how to develop your own stuff, which I guess is liberating, but I can imagine being frustrated as a storyteller trying to like come up with my own thing and trying to figure out if it's balanced. So that being said, I want to give a shout out to Mage the Podcast as well. And there was a recent episode with friend of the show, Charles Siegel, where he talked about the difference between narrative and mechanical balance. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, urging more attention to the former and saying like, yeah, it's okay if, someone is more powerful in this scene or that one, as long as it serves the needs of the story. So I think that applies here.
Oh yeah. I would not even say that this is a balance issue in this chapter. It's a vagueness issue. Meanwhile, the Dominions well defined what they do. I'm not big on saying, oh, this game needs to be balanced or something, but I think this just that crossed a line.
Needs to be clearer.
Well, no, this needs to be clear. The previous chapter actually managed it to be unbalanced, which is something I think most criticisms of role-playing games is invalid, but it is possible to actually make something unbalanced.
Fair. Yeah.
And then we have Chapter 6, I just want to say the opening art, I'm like, oh, there's an idea for your Fey main, the band Kiss.
Yeah, perfect. This is kind of the prelude to the introduction fiction that kind of gives you the backstory, which is a nice touch. Kind of brings you full circle.
Yep.
And going into this chapter, all of those thoughts from the first 5 of like, I like the majority of what I'm being given. I still want a solid tool set to come up with more of this stuff myself. I don't think that this chapter really did that.
No. But first, let's get into the origins.
Yeah.
Which is kind of odd that they picked these 3 and only these 3. But it's like ideas for possible origins of the Fae. Even though they had origins before, right? These are like alternative origins? I'm a little confused. Fallen angels, where they're basically like in between demons and angels-ish.
Which is a classic piece of folklore. I'll give them that.
Yeah, that's fine. Elder gods, which works.
Culturally flavored elder gods.
Yeah. The Jinn, which they put under elder gods, which seems more like they should be under the previous. Anyway.
And then Dreams Incarnate.
Which is the Changeling tie-in.
Yay!
They don't mention Changeling the Dreaming or anything, but it's like maybe they're actually shaped by human dreams. Although they're explaining the mechanics, I'm like, this sounds more like they're shaped by like the consensus and paradox, not dreams.
But I mean, that sort of metaphysical discussion in Changeling the Dreaming is an interesting and valid one to have. You know, as we've discussed before, to what degree are they shaped by collective human, unconscious or consciousness shifting over time?
Yeah, because these are definitely like the echoes and stuff are a human witnesses you, and then they witness you during your magic, and then there's like a system for it, which we don't really get more detailed than we get in Mage. And then you get something bad happening to you that makes you more vulnerable to the things humans do. So I don't know.
Yeah. One thing I do like about this chapter is how for each of these things they're introducing, there are suggested story hooks that play off kind of specific expressions of them. So I do like that.
Yeah.
So then we get some possible sources for storyteller characters, which I would say is probably more useful as a section. We have paragons of nature. So talking about them as myths from pagan theology adapted to the needs of the chronicle. The example we get are the Svartalfur becoming the Black Rot Knights. fairy stories where rhythm, repetition, and lessons matter. So, like Rumpelstiltskin. I was thinking of like American Gods and the works of Jonathan Carroll, as well as more modern examples.
Oh, talking about that dreaming thing too. If you want to do something outside of World of Darkness, yes, that's a American Gods hit, I think, too, for metaphysically.
Yeah. So if you don't use the paragons of nature as your basis, you can also have human and fey roles in stories. So the trickster, who tests and teaches and reveals, the outlaw as an untamed survivor and predator, and the true knight as an otherworldly epitome of virtue.
Mhm.
I think there should be more attention to the sort of pagan and fey variations of chivalry that are out there. When you look at something like the Green Knight, I think that's good fodder for a character. And then some notes on oath circles, which is, I think,
Yeah.
decent advice.
And it's nice talking about how to balance, like, not everyone being too samey, but also still working together.
Yeah. Distinguish them through backstory and relationship rather than like party roles.
Yeah. And then the Oath Circle rules, I don't mind these rules, but we need more of them. These are not enough rules for an Oath Circle. They even hinted at other things earlier in the book that aren't here, so it's like, what?
Yeah. I think like the sort of obvious one, and now I can't remember if it's actually in here or not, but presumably an oath circle could form from all of them swearing an oath with a human community rather
Yeah.
than like to each other. And that doesn't, I mean, Lords of Mortals is one of them.
This is what you're curious about the Chronicle I ran. He was falling under the Lords of Mortal idea, but then turned into like they were just ended up fighting the Summer Court or something.
Yeah, it's just weird how oaths never enter into it. Like, so, and then each of these suggests particular conflicts and distinct key characters within a story related to it and contextualized by the setting. And I really like that approach. But yeah, I agree that more would be nice. This line could have benefited from a deeper exploration of the magic system, a book of courts, and a book of, well, a storyteller's book, really. Those are like my top 3 picks for what I would have liked to see. And then, of course, we get a sample story.
How much did you read that one? I kind of read
yeah, I just kind of skimmed it. I mean,
yeah,
it's fine. There's 2 minor courts aligned with the winter and summer courts along Hadrian's Wall. There's a nice mix of sidebars that explain like stories and motivations and branching paths for various outcomes. There's a nice balance between action and narration. But yeah, I mean, it's like any other end of a core book sample story. It's take it or leave it. It's really, I think, just to show you how to construct your own, use this as a skeleton kind of thing. Although there are some storyteller characters that could be deployed in other stories that I like, including the twin witches that are in there. So, but yeah, it's very short. It's just like 5 pages, something like that.
But this also feels like a Changeling supplement, like in structure, especially 1E Changeling supplements.
Yeah.
And it's got the thing in it, so
So overall with this chapter, even though I'm still kind of chafing that like setting information and general storytelling advice has been kind of offloaded, the first part was pretty useful in terms of like framing the Fae as characters and on oath circles. But even if I wouldn't use the story, it seems like a well-constructed sample, so I'll give it that. But I wanted more.
It definitely doesn't leave me with a good idea of how to actually run a game well.
Yeah,
you need to do a lot more work than that, than just reading it.
It gives you a good basis for a one-shot, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe that's what I'll try.
Yeah, I could run that story.
Yeah. I would like to close by saying the character sheet is beautifully designed, in my opinion. And the second page is so amazing because it has all of the mechanics that you need.
Yep.
Like, none of that put details about your backgrounds and secondary abilities here. It's like, no, here are all of the Dominion mechanics and all of the Echoes mechanics.
I have a question for you, though. What's your opinion on how they wrote weaving? You see where there's like the mists with the dots and then there's weaving with the dots?
Yes. Oh, I mean, I'm fine with that, but
it's upside down.
Yes, I can understand how some might find that jarring.
No, yeah, this second page, I had printed it out and gave it to everybody. It was definitely handy. So.
Yep. And thus endeth Dark Ages Fae.
So, what do you think of this?
Well, so like I said, I never played any of the revised Dark Ages game, but I do think this would be my favorite of the bunch. I hardly agree that it is not Changeling as a game, or Changeling the Dreaming as a game, even though you can approximate a lot of the same themes. I'd call it a game, whereas Changeling the Dreaming is about maintaining balance. This game is about learning to balance in the first place, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'd have to think a little more deeply about how to set up my headcanon about this being a potential history for the Dreaming with relation to the Shattering. But there's, there's points of connection. There's that continuity of systems we kind of talked about to a degree.
Yeah.
So I think you could port your Lost game or your Dreaming game into this.
I think it would make a great alternative to Changeling the Celtic Cycle. Like it's doing
Fair.
something very similar, and I like this one a lot more. So, and I think it's a lot more usable. So,
but remember also that Celtic Cycle is meant to be in modern day.
Yeah, but I mean, porting this to the modern day would even be, which I know some
Hmm.
people have thought about and tried to write up stuff for it, and I don't think it'd be that. You'd have to figure out what's gone on meta plot wise, and some little mechanical tweaks, but I don't think it would be that difficult. But
it makes me think about how in the Vampire 20th Black Hand book, they have a mage group associated with them that still uses pillars.
Mhm.
And it's like, what rock have they been living under for 800 years?
Yeah.
But it works,
Yeah.
presumably.
But I know, like, friend of the show, Charles, who we mentioned earlier, he does not like Dark Ages Mage as a history for Mage the Ascension, but you can at least say, like, the setting kind of is this.
Yeah.
This is,
if you squint, you can see it.
There's so many games like this, actually. It's because there was fairies from Ars Magica, like before World of Darkness. There's Celtic Cycle, there's Hissien, even though it was a Changeling supplement. There's Lost, there's Exalted the Fair Folk. Like, these are all, they're not like just some other game about fairies that some other company made.
They're part of the heritage.
Yeah, and there's definitely, like, it's not completely distinct, and there's definitely, this was heavily influenced by Changeling, and C20 does have tie-ins to this, but it's not enough to make it actually the...
Yeah.
But there's definitely things I would also take from this. There's a lot of things you could take from this, like the treasures and the different places and, all sorts of stuff that could work for bringing into your Changeling game. So,
yeah. And doing a deep read certainly hasn't made me any less interested in playing it. I don't want to have to get Dark Ages vampire books to fill in the parts of the setting that I want to be richer.
Yeah.
That's where I'm
well, you can get the...
I do have them. I have the PDFs.
Okay.
I'll say that.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to read through those books.
I feel like almost folklore books or history books or Wikipedia or something would work well for that. And then, like, mechanics is where you might want to... It's like, oh, I don't think you'd want that. You really did want a war rules. I mean, those exist. You want more detailed holding rules. Those exist, especially if you're controlling human domains. The core rules, again, are free. Last time I checked.
Yeah. Ultimately, what I care more about is, because I would want to run it in its proper setting. I wouldn't bring it into modern times, because I do think it's interesting to explore the aspect of what does the rising tide of humanity look like to the Fae, and how will they face it? What do they need to know to blend in and avoid disruption, strength and connection? How do they develop the Changeling way out of all of this, if that's the road you want to go? That's the ultimate question that I would want to answer through this game.
Do I really need another idea for a Storyteller Vault supplement? Because I just realized one thing I like if I'm looking at the history here, this isn't the period I'd want to run the game in. First of all, I don't like the term Dark Ages for this time period. I know some people don't like the term Dark Ages at all, but if you're going to use it, this is not the right time to me for Dark Ages. I'd put Dark Ages as like fall of Western Roman Empire to like Charlemagne is what I think.
Oh, so actual Dark Ages.
Yes. So that would be fun for this game.
Yeah. Well, someone on the Discord asked if there should be / could we make a Dark Ages Fae 20th? And I won't say no, but I'm not going to be the one to do the core book for.
Yeah. But that's like a thing I might like, is like if I were to run it, and I wouldn't need to write a whole book for that even. I could just run it.
That's true. Yeah.
But I might run it.
You could do a historical setting book for the historical setting book.
And which is allowed under Storyteller Vault rules, they say, from 5th century on. But like, if I was just running, even if I was just going to run this, I might be like, hey, let's just set it in the 6th century.
Ooh, we should collaborate on a Plague of Justinian book.
Yes.
/ the Volcanic Winter, whatever that was. Speaking of the Discord, though, we do have a couple quick questions from folks. Sija asks, does this have any bridge to the Ars Magica Fairies book, and or can it be compatible with that more than Changeling? Just as you were talking about.
I don't remember enough of Ars Magica Fairies book.
Me neither. But I do think you could take the Arcadian realms from that book and port them into Dark Ages Fae pretty easily. because they're very lushly described, and the realm rules in here are open enough that you could do that.
I actually think it's a book that we're going to be doing later, so you haven't read yet, so you couldn't say either way. But for the Exalted, the Fair Folk, it's more compatible with this than it is with Changeling, I think.
Noted.
And I know Walking Away from Arcadia actually did this whole epic thing, but there's a lot of things where it's like, oh, that could actually work for like an alternate history for Dark Ages Fae. But...
I will bear that in mind when we get to it.
Mm-hmm.
So then Mondo asks, how would you change aspects of the setting to make the Fae and Dark Ages Fae more in line with the pre-shattering Fae from Changeling the Dreaming? I think the two biggest things for me are that Dream's incarnate origin story, like lean into that and the consequences of what that entails, and to highlight more of how human weaving can function as banality towards the Fae. I'd have to think more about that.
But... Yeah, I think you'd also want to do a lot of mechanical changes, like the way you gain echoes doesn't seem right for that to me, or what happens when mortals witness you doesn't quite seem right to me. You want to stop making sprites into spirits and more like chimera. You'd want to, like, there's a lot of things.
Well, I mean, the big obvious is that there's no dreaming in this.
Yeah, you'd want to add the dreaming,
which I think is under the surface here, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's a few pockets of near dreaming and that's it.
Yeah. Mondo also asked, what aspects, if any, of Dark Ages Fae have you incorporated into your Changeling games? So, like, aside from unleashing and seasonal arts being incorporated into C20 in general, and maybe some other things, people in the Discord server laid out a lot of their own ideas, so I would say check that out. For myself, I mean, I like to roll with alternative court systems. I've seen everyone roll with the lesser features of the mean. The broad strokes of an anime society are more interesting here, I would say, but I will also point out that Changeling 30th Anniversary Project will have an anime book in the mix. So.
Yeah, I think if you were doing it before we come out with the book for an anime, you could sort of kit bash this to be an alternate of an anime from what we get in C20, like using some of this stuff for an anime. My problem is, though, they put the emphasis and say, oh, everyone really likes these, called features again? Oh my goodness, I forgot.
Yeah, lesser and greater features.
But the features just don't have, there's not enough of them, and it's not enough, like, it needed more. So using it's hard without then doing that, so. But that would be helpful for an anime and non-kithed based Fae.
Yeah. Anyway, ideas. Yeah. And thanks, audience, for providing questions. Josh, if other listeners want to provide questions or otherwise get in contact with us, how can they do so?
Well, they can join our Discord at discord.me/CTP. They can, of course, send us an email. I guess that's what the dark ages of internet now. podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. Follow our Facebook page for Changeling the Podcast. Go on our YouTube, which now gets updated within an hour of us putting out an episode. We'll get it basically posted on YouTube. But YouTube's all doing that for us. So on YouTube for Changeling the Podcast, you can, of course, go to our website to find everything, changelingthepodcast.com. And we're on Mastodon. You can send us a toot there and talk with us. changelingpod@dice.camp.
And all of the links will be provided in the show notes to this episode.
Yeah, and once again, I'm Josh.
I continue to remain to be known as Puka.
I really hope I don't develop an echo based around like podcasting equipment.
Oh, spite of spites, we talk with goblins, owls, and sprites.
We traded a stocking full of apple pips and some of our own desperate hopes to an autumn court firstborn for a number of antique treasures that are now safely held in our podcast vaults. These include the sackbut of melancholy, whose limpid squonking brings an icy tear to the eye of even the most stalwart winter monstrosity. The reading stones of hidden import, which transmute the text of a page to the inner monologue of its writer in all their boring glory, and the trebuchet of Whittlingham, a siege weapon built of reeds and willow that flings not missiles but uplifting compliments, and whose ineffectiveness in battle is matched only by its catastrophic structural failures. We thank this nameless fae for their gifts of questionable utility, but more importantly, we thank you the listeners for putting up with our shenanigans, and in particular, special thanks to our patrons, known as Derek, Dorcadus, Ellerus, Hugo the Bogperson, Iabul, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sanchiger, Sija, Terry Robinson, and Tricerabeth. You too can Patreonize us by signing up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast, whereby you will receive sweet bennies like the shoutout you just heard. You can also leave us a review on the listening platform of your greatest convenience, or stop by our online community at www.discord.me/ctp to tell us how you really feel. All that said, we wish you the nonniest of hey nonny nonnies, and until next time, keep on dreaming.